Well, we have a first timer on Healthcare Unfiltered, and we have an individual I've admired from afar for a long time. And finally, after a lot of back and forth emails, Yelak Biru is with us on Healthcare Unfiltered. Yelak, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chadi, for having me. I have followed your podcast for a long time, and it is nice to be on this side of the podcast.
Really appreciate it. And I was telling you before we went on the air that the lighting is kind of weird. The lighting in my room, in my office, has gone berserk. So I have like weird lighting. So potentially this may be our directory debut on YouTube, depending how this looks like. Yeah, let's start with intros a little bit. I want to make sure that folks know your current position. What is your current role? And then I want to go back down memory lane to see how you got here.
Absolutely. So my name again is Yelak Biru. I have the pleasure of serving as President and CEO of the International Myeloma Foundation. I have been in my current role for a little over 2.5 years. November will be 3 years. So this is my first forte into the nonprofit world, and I am having fun, as I'm sure we'll get into how I got here.
Right. And this is a term presidency, or is it like a 5-year term? Is it like every year you have, how does that work?
No, this is like an employment presidency where I left my for-profit world. I worked for PepsiCo for a little under 20 years. I worked for Walmart for a little over 3 years. And this is really a full transformation in my career journey from being a data scientist and a computer scientist to being a CEO of a nonprofit organization.
So that's a nice segue. Tell us a little bit about your upbringing and your education, your training back in the day.
Yeah. So originally I'm from Ethiopia. People confuse my accent for being a Texan accent, but it is actually
That's exactly what I was thinking. Either Boston or Texas.
I lived in Texas for over 25 years. So I call myself a Texan by upbringing, if you would. But I grew up in Ethiopia, and I came to the US when I was 21 years old in 1991. And I was studying geology prior to coming to the US in Ethiopia. And I wanted to become actually a petroleum geologist. And my goal was to really complete my degree and help Ethiopia find petroleum or gas, if you would, in the Rift Valleys of Ethiopia. But when I was in fourth year, second semester, a few months before graduation, the Civil War came all the way to the capital, and the university was closed indefinitely. So I ended up immigrating to the US. But I actually changed my field from being geology to computer science because I was minoring in computer science when I was in Ethiopia, and I was getting A's without having to study. And it was in the early 90s in Texas where petroleum geology or geology in general was up and down because of many things that were going on at that time. And I ended up becoming a computer scientist. A lot of my courses transferred, but didn't apply towards my computer science degree. So probably I was one of the students in the room with the highest credit, but still an undergraduate student. So my really life has starts and stops many different times, but that's how I ended up in the US, studied computer science for my undergraduate degree at University of North Texas, and then decided to go to graduate school. I have been a career student, right? So what is another 2 years for me to be able to finish graduate school and then decide what I was doing? But that was really a curveball. Another curveball that came my way, Chadi, was that uh, first semester, a few months into my graduate school, I had a cough that wouldn't go away. And I ended up to like an emergency clinic where I ended up not having pneumonia or upper respiratory infection, but they said I was very anemic. And I need to figure out why I was anemic. And at that time, I'm dating myself here. I opened the yellow books, like, and I said, I will go to this doctor. And I ended up being diagnosed with multiple myeloma within a week after that.
How old were you?
I was 3 months before my 26th birthday.
So I I admit that never I have never known anyone that young with a disease with multiple myeloma. When you were diagnosed, I mean, not to say any type of cancer at the age of 25 is not something that you'd expect. And myeloma is a disease, I'm sure as you researched it, it's a disease that doesn't happen in the 20s.
Yeah.
I'm not going to ask you what your reaction was because I think it's a silly question to ask. Of course, you were shocked, upset, angry. But how did you go around when you were faced with a diagnosis like this as an immigrant? You've been here for several years. What do you do? Like, did you have enough family support? Do you have people around you? Did you know which doctors to go? There was no internet back then, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it was really the yellow book. And my diagnosis is actually, I'm very grateful for the internist who ended up diagnosing me because when I went to that emergency room and they said, you need to go find an internist. And when the page I opened ended up an internist at Medical City in Dallas, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And he looked at me and he looked at the paper printout I brought, and he said, I suspect three things. Give me blood, and I will call you in a few days and tell you what's going on. And I did hear him say, you may have a kidney failure or something like that. And so, but he never said cancer. So I was doing actually an internship at that time, Chadi, and I was in a room like this with maybe 4 or 5 other people. The phone rings and I pick it up and he says, it's Dr. So-and-so. I have the result of your blood work. You have multiple myeloma. It is not curable, but it is highly treatable. Come to my office and we'll decide what to do. And I couldn't Google it because Google was not around at that time. It was in December of 1995, or there was no Facebook or social media. And I actually Googled when was the first podcast. So it was actually in the early 2000s. So there wasn't podcast to listen to. So I ended up going to his office and he said, uh, he never said cancer, but he did say it is incurable. But I also did hear him say it is highly treatable. And he said, Doctor, go to Dr. Barry Merching, who was literally, you open his door and you open Dr. Barry Merching's door on the other side of the corridor. And Dr. Barry Merching was an oncologist, hematologist. So that was when I said, do I have cancer? And Dr. Barry Merching ended up saying, you need a bone marrow biopsy. We need to validate your blood work. I had a bone marrow biopsy. I had a full body X-ray. And within literally 10 days of me going to that emergency room, I was diagnosed with an incurable cancer, which was multiple myeloma. And I think you asked me how I reacted. I started asking questions and I found out that, the average age of diagnosis is in the mid to late 60s. Black people are more prone to get it. And if you are a Black male, you have higher propensity of getting multiple myeloma. And my attitude was, I'm glad it is me and not my father who was diagnosed with multiple myeloma. If anyone can fight this disease and has any chance of surviving a little bit, it would be me. And I actually was almost honored, if you would, to take this on behalf of my family and be the one who was being burdened by this. And it was also that time, Chadi, that my father and my mom actually were here in the US, that I saw my father cry for the first time and the last time in my life, where he basically said, children are not supposed to have cancer. Children are not supposed to die before their parents. And he was extremely distressed. But lucky for both of us, I was told I will not see my 30th birthday. I'll be dead in 2 to 3 years, even with the best of treatments at that time. Uh, and I recently celebrated my 54th birthday. My dad passed away about 6 years ago from colon cancer at age 84. And he lived a full life, and we had a really good life. So,
Well, happy birthday, and God bless your father. May he rest in peace. I'm glad that you got a chance to live with him for a long time. Um, yeah, like, were you a student when you were diagnosed, or were you already started your professional career? Were you still a student?
yeah, I was actually, I decided not to go to the workforce at that time and went directly into graduate school. I was not sure I was actually to become a career student and go to my PhD, but I ended up finishing my graduate school. I did not actually miss a class. At that time, the treatment available was VAD, vincristine,
What did you
adriamycin,
do?
and PEGs.
What did you do your graduate degree in?
Computer science. Both my undergrad and grad were in computer science. So by training, I'm a computer scientist, and ended up going in the information technology field. But I carried, and I have this on my Twitter feed, I carried my drugs and my chemotherapy pump to class. I sat in the back of class so people didn't hear my pump pumping, and I never missed a day of class. And 6 months into my treatment of vincristine adriamycin dex, alternated by Cytoxan, vincristine adriamycin dex, and BP16 and a few others of really hardcore chemotherapy, that treatments that you don't offer to myeloma patients today. I ended up being at that time what they stringent complete remission. And I collected my stem cells because I was going to go through a stem cell transplant, because they mentioned that it offered the best chance for me to live the best outcome or the best life with it. But then I asked a question, Chadi. I said, would having a stem cell transplant give me a better survival? Meaning, would I live longer? They said, we don't know. I said, would having a stem cell transplant allow me to live a better quality of life? They said they don't think so. There will actually be a dip in the quality of life, but at the end of the day, we don't really believe you will necessarily have a better quality of life if you did a transplant.
And when
And
you asked, who did you ask? You asked Dr. Barry, who he's the person who was.
so Dr. Berryman. And then he sent me to a place called Arlington Cancer Center. And I went to Arlington Cancer Center in Arlington, and the doctor who treated me there, or I found, was a very prominent doctor by the name of Carl Dickey. And Carl Dickey was one of the high-dose chemotherapy architects, if you would, for multiple myeloma and for leukemia. And he trained with Dr. Alexanian in MD Anderson, and he ended up coming to Arlington Cancer Center and really specializing in high-dose chemotherapy and transplant.
So you were, I mean, I can't imagine how challenging it is to make a decision in the mid 90s, like we just talked about. If there's one thing about social media, it broke a lot of barriers where you can talk to people suddenly and really can communicate. But at the time, A, you were pretty young. B, I
Yeah.
presume you did not necessarily know much about who is really the thought leaders of myeloma in the field. You just were told something. And how did you decide whether you should get transplant or not? And did you end up getting the transplant or did you actually not?
No, I asked Carl Dickey these questions, and he said no. And I collected my stem cell transplant, and they mentioned that I collected enough for 3 or so transplants. And I was scheduled to have my melphalan treatment on a Wednesday. On a Friday, I called Arlington Cancer Center and please let Dr. Carl Dickey, I'm not coming. I have decided not to do a transplant. And it was really uh, just just by chance I ended up choosing that path.
I can tell you that in the 90s, I was doing my residency. I started my internship in 95. And pretty much everybody with myeloma at the time, what we did was VAD followed by transplant, as long as they're young enough to get transplant. And if they were not, we would just do MP, melphalan and prednisone. So that was amazing that you did not do that. And then you took on a role at Walmart or PepsiCo, and you went into like a monitoring phase. Is that what happened?
Yeah, so I graduated in 96 and took a role at PepsiCo. That was actually the dot-com boom, if you would, happening at that time. But I ended up going to PepsiCo because uh, they showed me how technology actually ended up enabling the business. They showed us how the IT department at Frito-Lay was really key and instrumental in making the business happen. So I was into this translational technology, if that's the term, even at that time. Uh, when I stopped my treatment, I didn't have to be treated from July 4th of 1997, I'm sorry, 1996 until the early 2000s because VAD really put me in complete remission. One
Wow.
of the questions I got, Chadi, was, were you smoldering or were you like early MGUS or what? I actually had the doctors, the radiologists, the note they said was he had a lesion too numerous to count.
Yeah, that's
I
that's
had
that's not
lesions.
smoldering. That's not smoldering.
That's not smoldering. I had close to 90% plasma cells in my bone marrow. And my M spike was over 4.2 or 4.3 at that time. So I had uh, a friend of mine who was leading the North Texas myeloma support groups that I ended up joining actually said, Yelak was a really sick puppy, and I really was sick. I just didn't know it.
How difficult was to find at the time in the 90s, like a support group or educational forums? Like you mentioned, you joined a support group. Was that challenging to find? Easy to find? Did you benefit from that? Like, were you able to expand your network in the myeloma world that way?
Until I finished my 6 months of chemotherapy, I was like tunnel visioned. I wanted to continue to go to school. I wanted to make sure that I was able to tolerate the treatment and really live through it. When I finished that treatment uh, and had like a few months of break and I started really to recover, uh, my sister-in-law, my brother's wife, said, you need to go to a support group. I said, are you kidding me? I don't want to go to a support group, feel sorry myself, cry, and, be even more powerless than cancer made me to be. I ended up going to Arlington to the North Texas Myeloma Support Group. In the 20 plus years I was part of that group, Chadi, I must have missed 3 or 4 meetings. I ended up becoming hooked. I found my tribe. They allowed me to be part of their community. I started learning from others. And that is where I heard the terms like shared decision making. You don't have to recreate the playbook. You don't have to travel the myeloma journey by yourself. And it really was instrumental, in my opinion, to who I became in the cancer world, but as much who I became as a leader of teams and organizations in my business world.
So you're at PepsiCo, you're in remission, you're doing well, you're the support group, you're thriving, and you're on your career. But then you relapse. How did this when did this happen? How did it present, and what did you do at the time?
Dr. Barry Merching, one of the things that he did was he ensured that I did quarterly labs. And in one of my quarterly labs, even at that time, my mSPAC started going from 0 to becoming detectable in, I believe, like January, February 2000. And there was a decision that we need to make. Do we treat? What do we treat with? And do I stay in that community hospital, if you would, in Dallas, or go to somewhere like MD Anderson and be treated, or try to find out availability of clinical trials? At that time, members of the North Texas Myeloma Support Group actually were getting this thing called second opinions. I didn't know what second opinion was at that time, and many didn't exist actually. And I heard this doctor in Cedars-Sinai by the name of Dury actually ends up doing second opinions by phone, but it is better if I actually ended up going in person. And I ended up really shipping all of my, I don't know if it was FedEx, DHL, or whatever, shipping all of my records and coming to Cedars-Sinai for second opinion with Brian Dury. And that is how I also came to know of support groups, the IMF, and part of that like elevated engagement in the myeloma and cancer community through shared decision making and becoming advocate for yourself.
That was the first time you meet Brian Dury.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
nobody knows who Brian Dury is, of course, right? I mean, but that's also the first time you hear about the IMF?
No, I actually knew about the IMF because the North Texas Myeloma Support Group was formed in 1995, a few months before my diagnosis. And it was formed by a guy named Peter Tischler. He is a retired IBMer who moved from New York to North Texas, and he ended up being diagnosed with multiple myeloma. He was in his early 60s when he was diagnosed. And he said, I have never met another patient who had multiple myeloma. And so he did his research at that time and came for a patient and family seminar in 1995 to the Bay Area in San Francisco. And he ended up meeting with, and that patient and family seminar was organized by the International Myeloma Foundation.
I see.
And he ended up meeting the founders of the San Francisco area support group leaders. And he said, I want one in Dallas. And so he ended up coming back and asking at that time the IMF for names of people that have been diagnosed with myeloma in his area. And he ended up forming the North Texas Myeloma Support Group. So the North Texas Myeloma Support Group was affiliated with, if you would, with the International Myeloma Foundation at that time. And the patient and family seminars have been in the Dallas-Fort Worth area a couple of times. Although I was in remission, Chadi, I never missed a support group meeting between 1996 and 2000.
And that's what you did. I
Uh,
mean, you saw your calling. I mean, I think you found that community where you're really meeting other people. And again, you were in your mid 20s at the time of that
yes,
diagnosis. So you were,
yes.
I can only imagine how much you wanted to help others with this. You saw Brian Dury at the time of your relapse. What
Yeah.
was recommended to you and what did you do?
Dr. Dury looked at my result, my tests and my history even before I came to his office. He came to me, he asked me a bunch of questions, quality of life, what I did for life, my family situation. And he said, yeah, like I think you will benefit significantly if you had a stem cell transplant. I said, Dr. Dury, thank you very much for that recommendation, but I do not want to do a stem cell transplant. Do you have something else for me? He said, well, you don't have to treatment immediately. And then I ended up getting on this thing called BLTD, Bioxin, low-dose thalidomide, and DEX.
Was that a
So
clinical trial? Was that a clinical trial?
no, it was not a clinical trial. So by the time I waited, thalidomide was available on the market.
Got it.
And so I ended up getting thalidomide on a 21 days on, 7 days off cycle. And I think that put me on a steady pace for a period of time. But it never put me in remission, or I never went back into remission on that BLTD regimen. And then I had a conversation with my doctor, and we decided to add Cytoxan on top of that. So I added Cytoxan to thalidomide, and within a few months, I ended up coming into I stopped using the words remission, now undetectable plateau, because I became aware that myeloma is not curable. There will be many relapses and remissions. And so I decided to use the term undetectable plateau for myself. And that put me in undetectable mode for about 2 years time period. So
What
that is
was,
really how I went.
yeah, what was, why were you so opposed to transplant?
I I think I started reading and I started seeing patients who have gone to transplant that have lived shorter period of time than I did. And my whole goal was I came to the US as an immigrant to pursue a better life. Pausing my life to take on transplant with unknown complications, side effects, outcomes was not something, a risk that I was not willing to take at that time. And my disease, and lucky for me, ended up also responding to and me having good outcomes with non-transplant options. So to this day, I have not had, 28 years later, I have not had a transplant. I have had a CAR T therapy, but I have not had a transplant yet.
I mean, this is really fascinating to me that I actually did not know that you have not had a transplant. I'm listening to this at awe. And we're gonna talk more about this. But you went down for 2 years in remission, and then things happened, and so you had to go to another regimen. Now you're under the care of Dr. Dury as well as your local oncologist. So kind of like both of them are in charge, or you're just seeing Dr. Dury?
No, I'm just saying my local oncologist. Dr. Duri was actually like
For the
a
second.
one-time pulse check. And so like if you fall from a building, there's like a mattress. That's how I saw him. Somebody with a net to hold me if I needed his advice as a second opinion. So I was really into having an advisor, if you would, and a local oncologist who coordinated and managed my care on a daily basis, even early on.
So after Bioxin, low-dose thalidomide, dexamethasone, what did you go on after a couple of years? Now you're like in the mid 2000s, something like that?
Yeah. So I ended up going on adding Revlimid became available. But the image for me really, so even in my head, when I was on thalidomide, low-dose BLTD regimen, I felt like the addition of Thyroxine was what ended up doing it for my myeloma and putting me in that remission. And so I was in the belief that IMiDs really didn't do much for me. But I was willing to try uh, Revlimid when it became available for outside of a clinical trial. And I didn't do at that time a clinical trial as well, but I ended up going on VRD, Velcade, Revlimid, and Dex. And the Velcade we did was twice a week Velcade, not once a week Velcade. And at that time, I started IV Velcade, not sub-Q Velcade, because I don't know if we had made a transition from IV to sub-Q at that time. I really don't remember, but
No,
I
not yet.
remember
You were probably getting it day 1, 4, 8, and 11.
I was.
Yeah, yeah.
I was.
You got the VRD and you went in remission, I presume, for a while.
I went into another few years of remission. Uh, and then I came out of remission, uh, and we had a conversation with my doctor. And at that time, I actually switched from medical city to UT Southwestern, and I have a different set of doctors at UT Southwestern. Larry Anderson and others ended up becoming my doctor from UT Southwestern. Uh, but I ended up going into uh, another cycle of VRD.
Okay, okay.
But this time, I think a study was available that says you don't have to do twice a week Velcade. You can do once a week Velcade. And I ended up doing once a week Velcade, but that never really put me in. It controlled my disease, reduced my M spike some, but I never really achieved full remission. And then I requested, can we try twice a week Velcade? And it could be a timing issue. It could be a mindset issue. Twice a week Velcade was a little bit of Revlimid, ended up putting me in another remission.
So it seems like you've had series of chemotherapies over the years. When did you end up getting the CAR T? And tell me how this was, because CAR T in myeloma likely was on a clinical trial, I presume, when you got it, or was it commercial?
So in the craziness of 2015 when we had 4 drugs approved for the treatment of multiple myeloma,
Yeah.
Exazimab was one of them, Dara was another one of them. In January of 2016, I started on maintenance, if you would, on Exazimab. And I was on Exazimab maintenance for a period of time, and I believe until sometimes in 2018. At this time, I also moved from PepsiCo to Walmart, from Dallas Fort Worth to Bentonville, Arkansas. And I think it is probably important, Chadi, for us to talk briefly about the psychological aspects of having to live with myeloma as well, right? Not only was it incurable at that time, insurance was not portable, right? So if I was going to go from one company to another company and change insurance, I was either going to lose my coverage because of lack of portability of insurance, or I was not going to be covered for a period of time. So I don't know, a lot of people today may not understand the burden that puts on patients and families that don't necessarily have additional insurance, or there is only one insurance in the family. But that also creates or had an algorithmic effect in terms of how long you ended up staying in one place, the choices you made from a work perspective, the choices you made from a life perspective. So there is the emotional aspect of cancer diagnosis. There is the logistical aspect of cancer diagnosis, which is not necessarily always talked about, but in my opinion is really important. And not only are you caring or care is disconnected because you have to find your myeloma expert, you have to find your local oncologist, you have to find your internist. And as you become older, blood pressure and other things end up adding up. So care is disconnected. And not only are you managing your myeloma journeys emotionally, but you are having to become an insurance expert. You are having to become a reimbursement expert. You are having to become a care navigator for yourself. So you either get lost in the system or you ended up avoiding care, or that ends up becoming your really day life and your night life, and really not having a life outside of myeloma as well.
It is it is beyond stressful to go through this. I can tell you at the risk of appearing marketing myself, that's why I wrote a book called The Cancer Journey, which is by the time we air this, it will be out. It's actually for patients to navigate a very, very difficult journey. And there's a full chapter talking about, again, the financial issues, the psychological impact, and everything that you go through. You hit the
Yeah.
nail on the head there because that's really, really critical. How did you, yeah, like, I mean, you're going through this, you're doing the Walmart after PepsiCo, you're getting a lot of treatments here and there. How did you end up transitioning into the IMF? Like, was there, obviously you're involved with the IMF through the support group,
Yes.
but there's a difference between doing this and then transitioning into leading the organization. Tell me, how did this actually happen? And then what was the process? Did you interview for the job? You were just selected for the job? Like, how did you get the job?
Yeah. So, when I was in North Texas myeloma support group, Peter Tischler, our founder, uh, was asked to go to ASH by the International Myeloma Foundation. So the IMF was taking 10 or 12 patients to ASH many years ago, almost 20 years now, I think. And he said, "Are you kidding me? I'm not going. I'm old. There is this young guy who knows everything." And he was making fun of me a little bit. But I recommend that he goes. So I ended up also being exposed to the scientific portion of having to live with myeloma, right? I got exposed to navigating myeloma through the support group, the science aspect of it through going to ASH with the International Myeloma Foundation. And in 2010, Peter ended up passing away from multiple myeloma. And this is also what made me make the comment about the complications of care navigation. Was Revlimid was available, but the approval process for him to get Revlimid took longer than he could really survive. So he ended up with dying without having access to a novel therapy like Revlimid, right? So, but when he died, I said, I can't let the support group die. I need to really step up and take on. And so I ended up taking on that support group and became a co-leader of that support group. And another guy that I met, or another person I met through my journey was IMF as a leader of the support group, now attending the support group leaders summit that IMF puts together and brings all the support groups together. I met this guy by the name of Mike Katz. Mike Katz is the person who nudged Dr. Vincent Rajkumar and the ECOG myeloma committee to design a clinical trial for low-dose DEX in the treatment of multiple myeloma. And low-dose DEX is now the standard. When I went through chemotherapy in the 1996, I was on the 4 days on, 14 milligrams, 4 days off, 4 days on, 4 days off regimen. But then I met my cats, and I became good friends with him. He became my mentor, both in myeloma and in life, if you would. And Mike ended up passing away in 2015. And I called Susie Dury at that time, who was the founder, president, and CEO of the IMF. And I asked her, what can I do? I know we can't backfill Mike, and he has really a big shoes to fill. What can I do? She said, will you consider taking his spot on the board? I said, if I get approved, absolutely. So I went through the application process for board membership, and I ended up becoming a board member at the IMF. And fast forward that into 2021.
So as a board,
IMF,
before you tell me
yeah,
2021,
yeah, yeah.
as a board member, what was your role? Like, what would you do as a board member for the IMF? What
Yeah,
were
as a board member is to ensure a few things, right? The work that IMF did or does at that time was patient-centered, and it was a full-fledged nonprofit board membership where you are responsible for a fiduciary responsibility for the organization as a board member, responsible for the strategy and really holding the organization future being accountable for that, right? But so there were doctors on the board, Vincent Rajkumar, Dr. Bob Kyle, Dr. Brian Dury. So I let them do, and they did the scientific management of the board, and I did the patient centricity along with many other able and capable board members did the patient centricity portion of it, ensuring that we never lose our patient-centeredness. Just quickly, Chadi, the IMF was founded by Brian Novis, who was a patient who immigrated from South Africa, and his wife, Susie Novis Dury, and Brian Dury. So it was a patient-founded organization, and the mission has always been trying to find the cure while working towards prevention and the cure, right? Improving the quality of life of myeloma patients while working towards prevention and the cure. So that's really how.
And Susan then was the president, and then her term was over, or she wanted to step down, and there's a vacancy, and they asked you whether you want to be the president?
No, they actually went through a search process, and they did a search process, evaluated many different applicants, and I ended up applying for that role because my thought was from 1995 to 2000, there were 100 family members that joined the North Texas Myeloma Support Group. Today, 2 of us are alive. The other 98 people are dead. And so if I was saying, if I was given this opportunity to live long, I haven't yet found my purpose continuing to grow in the for-profit world. And I really wanted to make a difference and find my passion and align my passion to the work that I ended up doing here at the IMF. So I went through an application process and an interview process. I actually remember interviewing with one of the board members at 11 p.m. at night, Chadi. So it was a rigorous interview process, and I ended up being selected. And in November of 2021, I ended up joining as a CEO of the organization.
So, any stories during the interview process of questions that were surprising? Did you interview with Vincent, for example? Was he part of the selection committee or the interview process? You know, Vincent's pretty tough cookie, you know, when he asks questions.
Yeah. Vincent and I didn't necessarily know each other at that time, right? We were both board members, but we were cordial, but not necessarily we didn't know each other. So the interview process was really why would anyone want to leave a for-profit world to come into a non-profit world, right? And so I also personally need to come to terms with, is this the right thing for me? And is this the right thing for the organization, the International Myeloma Foundation? And is this the right thing for patients? But I felt like my data and analytics background, I was leading people analytics at Walmart at that time, my understanding of technology and how we could potentially apply that to the International Myeloma Foundation, my understanding of advocacy and having really being an advocate, I felt like I can add significant value to the organization and help elevate the organization's mission. And partly it's selfish, right? Because now what I was doing on the side, on my vacations, it became my work. And as they say, if you found your passion, you don't have to really work. I really did find my passion when I joined the organization.
So, this year is a presidential year. We have a lot of these campaigns all over the news. So, and each candidate usually proposes an agenda and they say, this is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm going to do. When you were interviewing as to be the president and the CEO of the organization, what were your agenda items? What did you say? I'm running to be the president of the IMF because I would like to accomplish these 5 things. I presume you must have had some kind of a proposal as to what is your term going to look like.
Yeah, and it was a guiding principle as opposed to these are the 5 things that I will do, right? Because I really wanted to evolve the organization into an organization not only that was really thriving on the shoulders of its founders, but also has a business mindset that could thrive even when I am no longer around in hopefully in many years. But number one was really, are our programs impactful? We have over 50 programs that the IMF runs in 4 pillars: support, education, advocacy, and research. Are all the programs that we run in each of those impactful? Do we really need to be able to measure and raise the bar for the programs that we have today? That's really bucket number one. And this is where a lot of nonprofits struggle, is not lack of data, but being data driven in their decision-making processes. So my objective was to make sure that the IMF uses data to drive its mission and to drive its strategy, or the other way, strategy and mission. The second one was really, we need to be able to broaden our reach. Not everybody goes to support groups. Not everybody has access to the internet today. And not everybody has access to the Mayos, the City of Hopes, the Dana-Farbers, and other places. And we really need to be able to broaden our reach. And this is not just from reaching the underserved community and the African American community or the Hispanic and other communities, but it's also reaching the myeloma community that are being diagnosed, the 36,000+ patients that are being diagnosed this year within 90 days of their diagnosis. Can we actually give them the information they need, the support they need, the warm blankets they need in order to live life fully? And the third part was, I have a data background. I love technology. And how can we really take advantage of that technology to amplify our mission of improving the quality of life of myeloma patients while working towards prevention and a cure within the 4 pillars of support, education, advocacy, and research? So that ended up really becoming our organizational agenda and our guiding principle as I moved forward. But as much as I knew, there's also a bunch of things that I needed to learn. Managing, motivating, and planning and strategizing in the nonprofit world is very different than managing, strategizing, motivating in the for-profit world.
When you say the IMF is the reach or the goal of the mission of the IMF is to reach patients be outside of the US, or is the US centric organization?
No, it is International Myeloma Foundation.
Yeah,
We actually,
the reason I ask, I
yeah,
think you probably got my, what I'm going to ask. You were born
yeah,
in Ethiopia. I was born in Syria. There are a lot of these low middle income countries
yeah.
that they struggle in having access, education. So while I recognize the name is international, how easy or difficult is to get into Africa, Asia, places where they just don't have the resources that we have in the US or Europe?
Yeah, that is really one of the most difficult and challenging aspects of this work is I get one email a week, if not more often, that says, my father was diagnosed, I live in this country, and I don't have access to such and such. Will you help me? Right? That is really one of the most difficult emails or communications you can get from anybody. Uh, we have this thing called the Global Myeloma Action Network. Our goal is really to be able to increase awareness of what multiple myeloma is, improve engagement of the communities around the world, and also really be able to increase access to myeloma therapies. While we may not be able to go into Ethiopia, where I am from, or to Syria or some other parts of the world, one thing we have done significantly well is establish, for example, the Asian Myeloma Network, which is a coalition of now 10 different countries that has initiated clinical trials in Asia and run now the 13th clinical trial just started. And Wee Ju Chung from Singapore is now the chair of the Asian Myeloma Network. So uh, the challenge of access is really, really difficult. And I remember even before I came to the IMF, I joined or I attended the Global Myeloma Action Network. And we're talking about this drug called Kyprolis, right? A lady, she's raised her hand up and she said she's from Serbia. Kyprolis is a science fiction for us, and I don't know when it will come to our country. And I know Revlimid was recently approved and became available in Romania within the last 3 or 4 years. So this challenge of access and availability of treatments is really, really challenging ex-US.
Yeah. Um, yeah, like where does the IMF gets funding from? I presume, obviously, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I presume some is philanthropies. A lot of it could be pharmaceutical companies and drug manufacturers. And the reason I ask is because as a non-for-profit foundation, and you're the CEO of this organization, how do you how do you continue to stay neutral in your programs in a way that is free of bias, because your funding depends on who's really giving money to the organization. So it's like a fine line. How do you do it as the leader of the IMF?
Yeah, that's really one of the common questions we get, and it's a fair question as well, Shadi, right? In order to maintain our nonprofit status, a third of our funds have to come from very different funds. Fund diversification is a requirement of staying as a nonprofit organization. But we don't get money from nonprofit organizations and then decide what to do. We actually decide what to do and go out and solicit fundings for those our programs. So the 50 plus programs that I mentioned to you, we have patient and family seminars in the US. We have regional community workshops. We have Empower program that is able to reach the African American community. We have work that we have done through our Black Swan research initiatives. So there are funds that come in as a result of us being bold enough to initiate these programs and people or pharmaceutical companies wanting to fund those programs. So we have always really been a patient-centered organization, and we will always be a patient-centered organization. The challenge with those funds, Chadi, is not influence. It is the ability to innovate with restricted funds. When you go out and get money for a program X, you have to use that funding for program X. So I don't have an additional amount of money, usually unrestricted funding, laying around to go and innovate for patient care and for me to initiate programs that are really groundbreaking. So for me, challenge is not necessarily being influenced or biased. Our influence and bias is always towards patient centricity. Challenge is really having that unrestricted fund for me and for the organization to be able to innovative and do things that are experimental, if you would, and you fail and you move forward from that.
And you get a lot, hopefully, from philanthropy. Anybody who is listening to this show, hopefully, can just go to myeloma.org and donate, like I will do as well myself. Yeah, like, do you support clinical trials, investigator-initiated studies, young investigators who are trying to lab work, things like that? Do you have some money allocated aside to get people who are starting their career in academia and research in myeloma to do that, or is this out of scope to what you're doing?
No, absolutely not. So one of the awards we have actually called the Brian Novice Award uh, is dedicated to junior and senior level researchers who are coming earlier in their not myeloma really. We want them to hopefully stay in the field of multiple myeloma, but who want to do work for the field of multiple myeloma. We have a very independent application process and selection process. And these junior grants are at $50,000 and the senior grants are at $80,000. And we have awarded over hundreds of them, 100 awards since its inception a little over 13 years ago. Some of the who's who of those awards today have actually received and have become really leading myeloma experts in their field. But we need to do more, Chadi. And we, as respectful of Vincent and his peers are, I'm doubtful that myeloma would necessarily be fully cured in their lifetime. So we really need to nurture the next generation of myeloma researchers. And that's why the International Myeloma Working Group also invites young investigators to be a member so they can be elevating their careers over there. And I'll leave you with this teaser as well, Chadi. One of the things that myeloma patients struggle with is going to clinicaltrial.gov and searching for a myeloma clinical trial and finding a clinical trial, right? So one of the things that we really want to be able to do is partner with a clinical trial finder site like sparkcures.com and be able to allow patients to find clinical trials that is more appropriate for them.
Absolutely. How's your myeloma doing now? Can I ask, how is your clinical situation?
Absolutely. So I digressing a little bit from exosome maintenance, when that started stopping to work, I actually started Dara Pomdex. And people know this. Dr. Shaji Kumar is my myeloma expert. Murali Janikiram here at City of Hope is my local expert. And they both agreed that when I started progressing on Dara Pomdex that I should try a CAR-T treatment. And I ended up having Carvicti exactly 18 months ago, Chadi. And for the first time ever, I have been mass spec negative. I have had clean PET-CT, and I have been MRD negative all at the same time. And I have been able to maintain that without treatment now
So you were telling me you had just received the CAR T cellular therapy 18 months ago, and you're completely MRD negative. Everything is negative. I'm
Yes, yes.
sure you are on, I know that you're on social media and you see, I've taped a lot of things on MRD negativity and things like that. And there's a lot of these questions about MRD negativity and these endpoints. Any thoughts from you? It's like almost the social media is a double-edged sword when people fight over lots of these things. But look, you're a patient, you're an educated individual, and you run a big organization. What are your thoughts about these conversations, these discussions, and all of these things?
I don't think, Chadi, that science will move forward without controversies, right? And so I'm really glad that myeloma doctors and experts are having these conversations because it really would help move the field forward. So if you told me that 20 years ago, we would have 17 approved myeloma therapies for the treatment of multiple myeloma, I don't think anybody would have believed that. Now we have gone from MRD 10 to the minus 3, 4, 5, 6, and there are conversations even happening. It should be 7 or 8 plus, right? So I feel like they help, but they also create a little bit of confusion for myeloma patients because should you get an MRD test or you should not get an MRD test? If you get an MRD test, what will you do with the results? Would you stop treatment? Or if you are no longer MRD negative, will you start treatment? Nobody is able to give you that answer authoritatively, right? So it is very similar to my question 28 years ago when I said, if I have a transplant, would I live longer? I think there is more and more evidence that if you are MRD negative, your outcome is much more improved. But I don't know if there is that need for us yet to get to that MRD negativity unless you are a high-risk patient.
Yeah, like I can speak, I can talk to you for forever. This is really what an amazing quarter of a century that you went through from being diagnosed with a disease that's incurable to really being an example of how people can live with the disease despite being incurable, and to now being the leader of an organization that's trying to make an impact in patients' lives. Um, any final words you would like to leave my listeners and viewers with before I take your picture, because we have to post it on Twitter, as you know?
Oh, yes. Uh, we have come a long way for the treatment of multiple myeloma. Some patients like myself are staying alive for over 10, 15, 20, 25, even 28 years. One of my mentors is Jack Aiello. And Jack was a 29-year patient who ended up passing very recently, within the last months. And so what brings me to work and what keeps me awake at night as well is patients like Jack and patients like our recent board member, Purnima, who joined the board with two small children who she was diagnosed when she was 39, and she doesn't know how long she has to live with multiple myeloma, and she doesn't know when and if her two children who are twins would be momless or when. So we have come a long way, but we have a long way to go as well. And my urgency for myself, for my team, and for the healthcare community in general is our work needs to continue, and we need to continue to make a difference urgently.
Yelak Biru, the CEO and president of the International Myeloma Foundation. Can't thank you enough. Thank you so much for coming on Healthcare Unfiltered.
Thank you, Chadi.